Welcome back to Just Giants with Grump and the Cranky Fan, the best damn podcast for the best damn football team and your favorite Giants podcast. We're back with a brand new year, 2025, brand new season for the New York Giants. This is our first episode
So
since the 2024 season has officially ended and we've done recapping it.
we didn't talk last week?
Yeah, but we had to recap.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So, brand new year. We're sitting back as spectators only, watching the playoffs,
Well,
going to hockey games.
yeah, good time this weekend. Little Lightning Devils. It was great except for the final score. Other than that, I had a great time. It was fun. And just getting back tonight from a miserable Knicks game. So, I don't want to hijack the show again with aggravation about the Knicks, but we're making do in a life without Giants playoff football as best we can.
Well, we did. So we got to see, a New York regional team win on Saturday.
Oh, the Devils?
The Devils. And
Okay.
you got to see a New York Giant tonight, Malik Neighbors, at the Knicks game. So it's sort
Neighbors,
of like
yeah, that's just like us booking our flights to go to New Orleans for the
it's
Super Bowl.
exactly like it.
Yeah, Malik Neighbors was there tonight. Justin Tuck was there tonight. I think Leonard Marshall was there tonight. There's a bunch of old Giants. Not like we're going to playoff games and rooting for them. So yeah,
So lots of big news around the NFL. Had an eventful playoff weekend. Got a lot of stuff to cover. But first and foremost, news as of yesterday, for those of you listening, Mike McCarthy, no longer the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. I believe that I predicted this both earlier this year and last year.
let's. It's interesting that the wording of the press release was basically they haven't agreed to terms on a contract. And we're not going to move forward with him. So it's interesting that
I think the press release actually said that they met and they both agreed. Like it was like a mutual understanding that the
yeah,
terms of the contract were just over.
and they're going to let the contract just run out
Yeah.
basically. And it's interesting when you see something like that where Mike McCarthy, as much as we've kind of ridiculed him, for being the coach, what he's done with the Cowboys, he had options. It was Chicago that wanted to have an interview with him, and the Cowboys had said no. So Mike McCarthy was really in a kind of take it or leave it with the Cowboys. And I think, the Cowboys are one of those jobs where it sounds like on paper that's a dream job. Oh, to be the coach of the Cowboys. Until you become the coach of the Cowboys and you have to deal with the 24-hour a day, 365-day a year circus that is being associated with that team, being the coach of that team, dealing with Jerry Jones, dealing with the Skip Baylesses of the world who constantly make every move that team makes or doesn't make, half of a segment of a hot take show. So,
Would you sleep with Skip Bayless for $1.5 million?
of course.
Okay. Sorry,
1.5
do you
million?
not know what I'm talking about?
No.
Oh, okay.
I just thought
Never
I
mind.
just thought for my personal preference,
No.
I will disclaim this: I am a staunch heterosexual, but for 1.5 million,
That was
let's go, baby.
an allegation that came out last week. But anyway, go on. I was making a joke.
The Joy Taylor
Yeah.
nonsense.
Yeah.
Well, now let me rethink my assessment of his attractiveness to him. Yeah, but it's something where it's almost like being in dog years, being the coach of the Cowboys, where every year feels like it's 4 or 5 years taken off your life. And he probably took an honest assessment of he's probably on some sort of a hot seat on that team. He's got a quarterback that can't seem to stay healthy, and we've debated on this show a lot just how great he actually is. They're really stuck with him because the cap hit to move on from Dak Prescott's enormous, and Philly is the best team in this division, and Washington is certainly the future of this division. And while he still has relatively good good reputation on the league, I think this is smart for him to check out his options and go somewhere, where the expectations won't quite be as high constantly all the time, whether it's his fault or not.
Well, would you consider Chicago a place where expectations aren't that high?
Yes.
And then he's got an interview scheduled for Wednesday. So, I mean, it's interesting because I would agree with you. I think the expectations are exceedingly high in Dallas, and then I think there's a whole tier below that, and those expectations are like Pittsburgh, Green Bay.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between having high expectations and realistic expectations.
Sure.
And I think sometimes being around the Cowboy universe, you sometimes have unrealistic real expectations, especially when you have the slightest whiff of success. Cowboys go 10-7. And all the you hear all offseason how they're the Super Bowl favorites.
Yeah,
that's unrealistic. It's a high expectation, but also unrealistic. Where, I think maybe even having this year, the rookie year that Caleb Williams had, your expectations are still going to be kind of high. You're hopeful you have a young quarterback, hoping you take it. But I think the unrealistic part of, well, this guy's not going to come in all of a sudden be changing the league around in year one. I think it kind of tempers a little of those unrealistic part of the expectation. So it's not a terrible spot to be in.
No, not at all. I do think it's interesting that he interviews to go to the NFC North, which is, he would be taking on the one team that isn't that didn't go to the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He'd be walking right into an incredibly tough division. Again, that's projected. That's a little bit like people already saying that the Giants' 2025 schedule is one of the hardest of all time. We don't know anything.
And also, everything is so cyclical too. And the windows for these teams are pretty small. We may not know. Sam Darnold may not be their quarterback next year for Minnesota. That changes a lot of things. Jared Goff, who knows? Things change so much.
Ben Johnson could not be in Detroit.
Exactly. So, and also, you don't hire a coach for next year. Someone like him too. You're building, and especially in a situation they are with a very young quarterback and a young team. You're building kind of what Detroit did. You want to build a culture. You want to, incremental, sustainable success over a longer period of time. So it's not like, all right, let's say Detroit's still really good next year and Minnesota's making another run and stuff. And all right, well, that's year one. If your expectations are year one or bust, he just left that cauldron in Dallas. So I think it's fine.
Yeah, I would agree. What's next for Dallas?
Well, the rumors are already out there, and the Deion Sanders, which I personally think makes absolutely zero sense.
I don't see that legitimately happening. I'm actually worried that Ben Johnson goes there.
I don't know. I think, when you spend so much more money on a quarterback and you have unrealistic expectations, I think you're going to go for a marquee name. Now, Deion Sanders is a marquee name. That doesn't mean he's qualified, much less the coach that brings him over the top. Ben Johnson, he's a guy that NFL people know about, if you watch on Sundays, but I don't think you put Ben Johnson on the front page of the newspaper if you're not a sports fan and be like, oh, he's the coach of the Cowboys, like Deion Sanders does. And I think the Cowboys will always be a splash-first organization, and I don't think they go his route. And to their detriment and to the Giants' benefit, I think.
Is Bill Belichick's $10 million buyout too much, or is he just not part of it?
The Cowboys print their own money. If what's holding them back is $10 million, they will pay the $10 million.
Is Bill Belichick just out of the question anyway, though?
I think he's out of the question.
Okay. I'm just trying to think of who the marquee name is then. Bill O'Brien.
It's interesting that a guy like Vrabel would have been an interesting pick. Mm-hmm. Maybe if they gone ahead and fired, or just said, you're not coming, we're not renewing your contract, and ended this right after the season. I think this kind of tells me that they kind of wanted McCarthy back. And obviously I'm not in the war room with the Cowboys, but my gut tells me that McCarthy's the one who ended this thing.
That's interesting. I mean, nevertheless, your theory that they're going after a name does not assuage my fears that it's going to be Ben Johnson. I think if any reason it's not Ben Johnson, it's because they somehow wrangled Deion Sanders, even though it doesn't make sense, or Ben Johnson just flat out turns him down because he doesn't want his first head coaching job to be under the microscope of Jerry Jones, which is a fair reason why he wouldn't, I would think.
Let's do a real 30-second assessment of the Cowboys themselves. Like, what are you getting into on the field and your roster?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest concern is that right away you have an issue with whether or not you're going to be able to retain Micah Parsons. I think, too. Yeah, I think they're in an odd scenario because you're not inheriting a terrible roster, but you're definitely inheriting a changeover roster. I think the defense is on its way down. They've made their big financial decision, though, to put all their money onto Dak Prescott. So you're sort of stuck with a quarterback. The offensive line is getting older and is not what Dallas has been known for in the 2010s of being this like brick wall offensive line. That's just no longer the case. There's some aging guys in the wide receiver room. I mean, you have some stuff in the wide receiver room. That's not true.
Yeah, CeeDee Lamb is fine.
CeeDee Lamb is more than fine. Jalen Tolbert is pretty good. And then you have like Kevontae Turpin is fine. Brandon Cooks is fine. Is Brandon Cooks still there? I think he's a free agent.
I think he's a free agent.
Yeah. I think you've got Jake Ferguson as a good tight end. So like there's stuff there, but it's very fledgling, I think. Like Dallas is somehow as a roster is finding its way, cyclically finding their way to a restart.
And then you don't know next year how many games you have Dak Prescott versus Cooper Rush. Mm-hmm. And there's a drop-off. I mean, Cooper Rush is a perfectly fine backup quarterback in this league. He's not Dak Prescott, whatever you think of Dak Prescott.
Yeah, and I think it's also fair. I don't know. Dak Prescott does get injured a lot, and you're financially tied to him. Although I know next year they're really stuck with him. I don't know for how long. So maybe we're kind of overanalyzing the Dak Prescott thing. Could be. But that's a quick 30-second thing.
Yeah.
Anything else on the Cowboys?
Let me ask you something. Hindsight's 2020, but if you were Jerry Jones, would you have fired Mike McCarthy last year and promoted Dan Quinn?
I would. Yeah, I absolutely would have. I don't even know. I might have said that. I think I had a hypothesis that there was going to be a falling out between Quinn and McCarthy, and I thought Jones would pick Quinn because the defense clearly performed, whereas the offense did not. Mm-hmm. Not that that's super scientific of choosing, but it's not like Dan Quinn went to a Super Bowl. I mean, the only difference between McCarthy and Quinn is that Quinn lost in one of the biggest comebacks of all time. Like, he was blowing out Tom Brady and the Patriots in a Super Bowl, and Mike McCarthy won with Aaron Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers, exactly.
Yeah. So I know that there's more to it than that, but Dan Quinn's defense also won a Super Bowl in Seattle. So, I mean, for me, I would have went Dan Quinn, and I know this sounds like revisionist now that like one's on the ascent and the other's not, but I really probably I'm positive I said this.
If this is your first time listening to our show, first of all, welcome. And second of all, this is not new commentary from Grump. He's always had a higher opinion of Dan Quinn as a head coach than I have. Not that I'm saying he's, bad, but I've always been like, I
feel like I was one of the few people that was like, yeah, I know Washington's adding a bunch of old people, but I don't know. I think they might be really good this year. I don't think I predicted them going to the playoffs. I'm almost positive I did not, but there were some people super out on Washington, and I was not one of them.
I might have been in the not super out, but kind of lowercase o out on them. So I'll take that loss. That's fine.
Well, that wasn't a shot at you.
No. But if something's wrong, I usually look in the mirror, and it's usually me.
Yeah, I don't know. They're stuck with Dak Prescott for at least 4 years. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the contract now, and we're looking at dead cap hits of $151 million.
It,
62 million, 34 million. I just don't see that.
150. Jesus H Christ, that's crazy. I mean, how much did Jerry Jones pay for the Cowboys? Did he even pay 152 million?
I don't
That's
know.
nuts. That's crazy.
Well, that's the dead hit. That's just security
Yeah,
for Dak
but,
Prescott.
but it's such a large number, whether
I
it's a
know.
real number or not. It's like we're talking what the cost of a franchise was 30 years ago. That's insane.
All right. Anything further on the Cowboys?
No, I've talked about the Cowboys a lot more than I care to on this lovely Monday evening.
Do you want to add anything further on Dion?
Well, Deion Sanders is a shuckster and he is a snake oil salesman. And part of his allure, I guess, if you want him as the coach, is he's kind of a package deal with his son. And you just mentioned how many trillions of dollars the cap hit is for moving on from Dak Prescott. I don't understand why Dion would want to go to the Cowboys without his son. So I think I do not doubt at all that the Cowboys reached out to Dion. I don't think Dion's taking the Cowboys very seriously at all. I think Dion is in a very rare position that probably of any other coach in the pool can probably go anywhere he wants to if it's the right situation for him. And Dallas is not that right situation for him. Remember, let's not fool ourselves with some sort of revisionist history that Deion Sanders is this cowboy for life, and because you
Really?
remember,
Yeah.
you highlight him. Remember, Deion Sanders, besides being a Knoll, he made his bones really when he was in Atlanta. Remember, he played baseball and football the same day.
Yes.
He then became a hired gun.
Yeah, I think he was in Dallas just as long as he was in San Francisco.
Deion Sanders, the 49er. I mean, he was a pure hired gun.
I think he was a Redskin at one point.
Yeah, so this notion that he's coming home and it's, Tony Romo coming back to coach the team, that's not the case. He was an employee of this. He was Boba Fett. He was a bounty hunter for them. So I don't think he's got any, and he's also, as he said, like with Florida State, how he's basically disowned Florida State. He doesn't have the sympathetic heartstrings that tug when a blast from the past comes. I mean, he's a guy that's going to look out for him and his brand. Well, let me take that back. He'll look out for his family first, which is not entirely terrible, but he's also going to look out for his brand and him. I mean, think in TV in the last month for commercials or coming up tomorrow on Regis and Kathy Lee. Who's the coach you're always seeing? It's prime time.
Yeah.
How many coaches have a nickname? Not many. I mean, he is a well-cultivated brand over 30 years, and the Cowboys need him more than he needs the Cowboys. So I don't think he's going there, bottom line.
Can you name any other head coaches with nicknames? Go. I got two already in my head.
Bum Phillips. I don't know what his first name was.
I guess that counts. That's I was thinking like the football name.
Ron Rivera was the Riverboat Gambler, right? That was one.
Riverboat Ron. Give me another.
Let's see. I'm not going to use any of the funny nicknames that Bill Simmons and Cousin Sal use. No one else knows. Let's listen to the show.
I said Bill Parcells.
The tuna?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There you go.
Anyway, I 100% agree. I don't really know why Dion would leave the college ranks. I think this is what suits him. I think he's an excellent teacher of kids to get to the next level. He may not win. He hasn't won anything as a head coach at the college ranks, nothing at all. But just being able to flip Travis Hunter from Florida State, I think that shows that's where his real skills are. I mean, I understand why he would leave, for money. He doesn't need it, but, money, glory, that's sort of his brand and recipe.
Well, I think if the right opportunity in college for something bigger and better came along, I think he would take it. I honestly think if he didn't have the fallout with Florida State, he'd be the Florida State coach right now.
Oh, yeah. I think he'll take a bigger opportunity in college, but I don't think he should leave the college ranks. I think he's very good there.
I think, to be an NFL head coach, you can't really come off the street. And he's still a relatively young head coach with
Sure.
very limited pedigree behind him to become the head coach. Like, he wasn't a coordinator. He wasn't a position coach. He wasn't a GA. He wasn't all the things that you do to go up the ladder. Now, I know that's accelerated now with these coaches getting younger and younger, but, remember, from the time Deion Sanders retired until the time he got into coaching, he was hosting Miss Teen USA, and he was on NFL Network for years, and he was doing all these things that were not. And I don't care what anybody says. You can follow the league as much as you want as an analyst. It's not the same as being in the league.
Yeah.
And
It's not being out of the game, but you're also not in it.
You're not exactly in the game, for sure.
All right, so let's flip to some Giants news here.
Okay.
It came as a shock to some people that Shane Bowen was retained. At least as of this episode. I still think that there's a chance that could change, although it's getting slimmer and slimmer. I'm not that shocked.
I'm not at all.
Yeah. So I'm not going to defend some of the horrendous defense that we saw down at the stretch, but I would note that most of the horrendous defense did happen down the stretch. And, Dexter Lawrence is not on the field for some of those games. We already knew what this defense looked like without Dexter Lawrence on the field. And, Dexter Lawrence plays 98% of snaps, and most of the early games that were lost on defense happened in the 2% that Dexter Lawrence was not on the field. Not that the offense was doing anything good, but I think that the Giants went into this year doing most of their off-season damage, adding to the the offense and not the defense. Yep. Really not much of anything added to the defense this offseason. You get Drew Phillips, and that's certainly something. But when you and Tyler Nubin. But draft assets, even as they're more like premium as those were.
But those are more looking towards the future.
Always looking more towards the future. Yeah. Were they plug and play starters? Pretty much. But were they game changers? They were not. Most of the the immediate guys that were upgrades were veterans added to the offensive line. Greg Van Roten, John Runyon, Jermaine Illuminator. Those were the huge offseason additions. I would say even Devin Singletary, a huge offseason acquisition. They really changed the scape of the offense there. This defense was leading the league in sacks for like 7 weeks. Despite everything I just said, Brian Burns being the major addition, Kayvon Thibodeau, an alleged bust, Dexter Lawrence was leading the league in sacks for, I also think, about 7 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I think that speaks to some of what Shane Bowen can do.
Well, let's go back to Mara, and let's take him at face value for the things he said. That he's tired of constantly, flipping the switch and starting over and starting over and starting over. Well, if you fire Bowen now, you're going to be on your third defensive coordinator in 4 years, right? And after a defense that, wasn't very good last year, and when you move on from Wink Martindale, that was not something that, usually when you're going to fire a coach, you kind of think about it in week 5 or week 11 or 12, like, we're going to make some changes in the offseason. This is not going well. It's not we did bad in week 17, so I have to make a decision. This was not one of those, it kind of boiled to a head at the end and came to a flashpoint, and something had to be done. So it wasn't like they were particularly prepared for this move. You change your defense up. So you have personnel based on the previous guy you had in. And also, it's just, I am always going to be a players play person. I think I get too many arguments with people where everybody thinks that football is played by two men controlling either on a joystick or at a chessboard, moving players around. And if something doesn't happen, it's the guy who's moving the players around fault. Players play. And if you don't have great players or good players, your defense is just not going to look that good. So I think, with this theme of why the general manager and the head coach are back, I think the exact same reason why this defensive coordinator is back. Let's prove as much as we can that if changes do need to be made, it's because of the coach is not getting it done. I don't think we could do that right now with everything that's gone on with this team.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think also part of what he inherited were some scheme-specific players.
Right, that's what I mean. When you make a move that quickly,
Yeah.
you don't have time to kind of prepare. Like, okay, in the draft we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It's you start the process, like you have said before several times. Defending Joe Shane, like you have your people and your personnel in and your process or how you're evaluating talent before you select them. You're preparing in October, November, December for this scheme under year 3 of Wink Martindale. All of a sudden, no more Wink Martindale, and we've gone in a different direction with this next coach. That's going to slow down the process of having a good defense.
Yeah, I would agree. I will also say that while I'm not surprised by it, I'm also not that enthused by it. You know what I mean? I'm never going to be enthused by firing. You know what I mean? Well, I guess I would be. That's a lie. I would
a sign of relief than enthused, I guess.
Right. In this instance, I wouldn't have been enthused by his firing because whatever. I'm sure there was some questionable stuff going on, but also you just can't operate your defense if you don't have your guys, and you can't operate your defense if you don't have your guys and the starters. So.
Think about even like what you do in everybody's job. Like, if you're a manager and you come into a place and you have people you inherited, but they don't do, you have a process how you do things and they don't work that way. You replace them. You bring in your people. So it's just a function of life, not just football.
Yeah. So I think perhaps if he were fired and they hired a defensive coordinator that I was like immediately on board with, I might possibly have been enthused, because he as a defensive coordinator has not really enthused me much. He's been fine, I think.
I think just my overall outlook of this team is, yes, Joe Shane, Brian Dable, Shane Bowen are all back right now. As of this moment, Mike Kafka's still there. I'm still at DEFCON 2 on this team. Like I am not planning on, in the chances that this group is going to be together and being with this team in 2026 are very questionable. In 2027, even more questionable. So, okay, they kept him. I'm still not overall enthused about anything at this moment. I'm still very nervous that all of these guys are short timers. I think right now with this team, we have to kind of take this one day and one step at a time and look for those before we start thinking about the future and long-term things. Was the process for the draft better? Was, the bones did we pick for free agents better? How did off season look? How did week 1 look before we start thinking about it? So to kind of answer what you were saying about enthused, there's very little for me to be enthused about, period. I guess the continuality is something to be, okay, that helps potentially salvage this group. More, ins and outs of key positions makes that job harder for the coaching staff.
I also think, I guess, let's address this first. I agree with you, being on DEFCON 2, the chances of this group being together in 2026 is not super concrete. So then, why is it a smart move then to not just fire them then now? Fire them now. You could have gotten Mike Vrabel theoretically. Oh,
you're talking about the head coach.
I'm talking about everything.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about the coordinators.
You said this group. You meant the coordinators?
I was talking about the coordinators, but kind of in relation, because even if you decide you want to keep Shane Bowen and Shane Bowen does a halfway decent job next year, but the team is not making the progress that Mara wants and he decides to blow out, head coach, general manager, the odds are that defense coordinator is gone anyway.
Okay, fine,
so the baby gets run out with the bathwater.
So the DEFCON 2 still applies to Brian Dable.
Oh, that's 100% who it applies to.
Okay.
It applies to
So then,
Joe Schoen.
My
Brian
question
Dable.
is, why is it smart to not just fire them this year?
Well, because maybe you just don't think you've had enough time to properly assess if they're good or bad. Again, we're dealing with, for coaching, is the roster good enough? For the general manager, has he done as much as he can or should be doing at this point to make the roster better? I think you still try to we're still in fact-finding mode. I think in this, after 4 years, you have enough data to tell you we need to move on or not.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with you. I think that being on DEFCON 2 with Brian Dable and Shane Bowen, Mike Kafka, Mike Kafka might even be DEFCON 4 at this point. I'm not sure Mike Kafka's here. Starting 2025.
DEFCON 2, I'm doing it from War Games, where DEFCON 1 is World War 3. So to me, I'm a DEFCON 2. I really think that I'm on very...
Fine, DEFCON 1 for Kafka then. Never mind.
Yeah.
Misread that. But my point is, I think that Joe Schoen is more safe. And the reason I think that is because when you are talking about constantly rebuilding things, the head coach plays a major part in that, but not in the way that John Mara's talked about it. He, in his public statement in support of retaining them, he talks, when giving detail, most of what he's talking about is people that were added to the front office, their evaluation, the amount of information they have now. It's mostly things with Joe Schoen. He doesn't really speak outwardly in support of things that Brian Dable is in control of. If you notice, there's nothing really detailed in that way. And I think that Brian Dable's here because he put his eggs in the Joe Schoen basket of, this is going to be a long fix. Now, this is all my theory. This is nothing to do with my opinion. It's irrelevant. But this is what it seems like to me, is that Joe Schoen was able to sell him on this, like, look, this isn't going to happen in 2 or 3 years. It's going to take time. You guys have a lot to change. It's going to take a while. And he is lockstep with Brian Dable. Joe Schoen and Brian Dable see players the same way. They see the game the same way, or at least similar. They have this similar ideology, and it's that reason, because Joe Schoen wants him there, that Brian Dable's there. However, I do think that could change in 1 year while seeing the roster get better. Brian Dable has things other than the team not performing working against him. His relationships with coordinators, you know what I mean? Like, there's been multiple times that we've had Joe Schoen in on the headset and in attendance. People made a big dust up about certain people talking to players on the sideline. Joe Schoen, Brandon Brown as well.
He's also spent all his currency of goodwill too, pretty much. I mean, everyone, when you'll get a lot more leash and a lot more leeway, if you haven't done all of these things, including the record, including the dust ups and all this, you kind of burn calories with that. And he's there's nothing really left in reserves with him. One thing I do want to say, Grump, is that I know it's a very popular thing to say, well, I want the head coach and the general manager to be on the same track, like we bring them in at the same time. I want to push back a little bit against that.
Yeah, I would think that that's not 100% all the time. Go ahead.
I want to amend it a little bit. I think it's more important that the coach is in the same wavelength of the general manager than vice versa, because to me, it's a lot easier to get rid of a coach than it is to get rid of a roster. So to me, like, this is great that they both start at the same time. As of now, we think they're still on the same page. But if a decision is made that they want to get rid of the head coach, that's fine for me. You don't have to throw, the general manager out at the same time. Let that general manager, because he has built this roster, it's actually easier to pick a head coach because you know what you're kind of looking for. I have built this roster. This is the image we have, and this is what I'm looking for in a coach. I think when it's the opposite, when you have a head coach and you fire the general manager, that's where I think there's big problems.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
so I don't, a lot of the pushback, or a lot just, the sheep who just cliche speak whatever they hear is like, well, you have to get rid of both so they can stay on the same schedule and the same hire pattern. And I just don't agree with that. In this situation which the Giants are in now, where it appears that Shane is probably safer than the head coach.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know. Yeah. The last thing you want to do is fire a GM and leave the head coach and then force a new GM to have a head coach that he didn't pick. But that doesn't mean that you always have to fire both at the same time. I almost think that this is obvious, but it's clearly not.
Because then it gets ridiculous. Because then it's like, well, that's not their quarterback, and then all of a sudden, so we have to make sure we have general manager, head coach, and quarterback aligned for every hiring decision. And we have to throw all three out and start over. That's not the way the world works.
No, it's not. And I think as long as you have the GM you want, I think it's just important that they all see the game the same way, but the timing of which they're hired is not really all that important. Yeah, I would agree. In any event, there was some really boring playoff football this weekend. We both missed the Saturday games for the most part. We saw about a half of the Texans-Chargers blowout, and then we watched the Devils take it to the Tampa Bay Lightning. So we missed the entire
fucking overtime. Let's not get crazy. Take it to it. Jesus Christ.
I was waiting for you to jump in on that.
Ridiculous.
But we completely missed the Steelers getting trounced by Baltimore. That one was probably the most obvious outcome, I think, of playoff weekend.
Well, you know something? Everybody thinks that every playoff game should be an overtime thriller. I mean, the first week of the playoffs, whether it's the new college format or the NFL, you have, teams are clearly better than other teams.
Right.
And, next week is always my favorite playoff weekend of the year, because that's when you have, you have your elite teams and teams that, are won the week before. So it's like, they're probably more deserving to be there. That's when it gets exciting. I mean, and, these scores, playoffs are not, as much as we say that this is the entertainment business sports, playoffs are not meant solely for your entertainment. They're here to crown a champion, first and foremost. So if you don't like the fact that it's a blowout, you're still going to watch. I mean, the ratings prove it. The gambling receipts prove it. So I just quit bitching. Everybody just bitches. Bitch. They bitch about the first round of the college playoff. They're bitching about this. It's like...
Well, I'm going to bitch.
Good.
Sunday, we had the Bills-Broncos game. I guess there was some level of confusion over whether or not we had a touchdown pass in the back of the end zone with the foot. Mm-hmm. To me, that looked crazy live, almost certainly out of bounds. Watched the replay and went, oh, goddamn, he was in that whole time. How about that? The play was confirmed with replay, and I still have Broncos beat writers saying that they got robbed. And I just don't, like every camera angle, he's got control of the ball. The foot doesn't touch out of bounds. I mean, what a waste of breath going over all of that. Did you see the play?
Yeah, and I still remember as a kid, I'm old. It was 79, I guess. It was Houston-Pittsburgh in the AFC Championship game. And Houston got screwed because... he had 2 feet down when you look at replay, but they called him out of bounds. But back then, you don't have the benefit of replay to overturn calls. Mm-hmm. It was like the first time there was a real, and it still took 15 years to actually get, the beginnings of replay in. But when you have replay and the way they analyze, dissect it, and you still think you're robbed when you have the video evidence for it, I really don't have much.
Yeah, especially when the call is confirmed.
Yeah.
And then the Green Bay Philadelphia game, I guess was pretty exciting. Game was close for the most part.
Did anything over the weekend really surprise you or just did things kind of go chalk what you were expecting?
I didn't think everything went no, I thought LA would put up a better fight against Houston. I thought that game would be closer. Herbert shit the bed, allegedly. Only saw really half of that game, so can't really say. Pittsburgh, Baltimore made total sense to me. That was exactly what I expected. Denver and Buffalo was exactly what I expected. Philadelphia and Green Bay, I will say, I thought Philly was going to beat the Christ out of them. And that game was really close, even despite the fact that it was almost like a cartoonish montage of how many wounded Packers there were. I mean, down to the point where you had just Dontavian Wicks playing wide receiver.
Yeah,
so
nuts.
Love did not play a good game, I would say, but also considering what he was working with, held them very, very much in puncher's distance for most of the game.
And that's why some of the discord about Love is a little silly too. I mean,
yeah. And then I would say the night game only.
This is the one I was locked in the most. This game. So go ahead.
It turned out to be the best game to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I had to listen to Chris Collinsworth throughout the whole thing. Just drive me crazy. I don't know if any of that surprised me. I thought that was an excellent game. I truly would have predicted that game as a coin flip, and it pretty much was a walk-off field goal that hit the post and went in. I don't know.
I never want to hear the word doink again, by the way.
Oh my God.
Enough.
It was annoying literally the first time, and now they're just riding. It's like they're trolling me specifically.
That game, everything kind of happened the way I thought it would played out, except for the fact that I thought the little intangibly stuff should say the Bucs would win in a late field goal. So I was actually surprised at the very end that Washington did win it. I mean, that Tampa Bay team is a, linebackers, safeties, cornerbacks away from being a really, really good team. That's
Todd Bowles is the most underrated coach in the NFL.
Well, it's funny you said that because I have a lot of friends that are Buck fans, a lot. And almost to a man, they want him fired. They think he sucks as a coach. And I'm like, guys, again, players play. Look who you have back there. I mean, there's no playmakers back there. They had tons of injuries in their secondary, and the last couple weeks they've been picked apart by pretty good offenses. But to put us on Bowles, I just the Bucs to me are they have a really good offense, a pretty good front four. Secondary's awful. They're like a 9-8 type of team. I think they slightly overachieve than what they should have been. Baker Mayfield is in the perfect position. He's never been this good in his career, and where he is now. There's all these little things, and I don't know. I just some people just make perfect the enemy of the very, very good, and I think Todd Bowles is a very good coach, but they think he should be perfect. I think they're nuts.
Yeah, I would agree. I think he's the most underrated coach right now. And then I would say this Minnesota game, Minnesota Rams, the only thing that's surprising is just how much of a blowout it is. I actually would go with the experience of Sean McVay and Matt Stafford here over Kevin O'Connell and Sam Darnold.
You got to remember something, too, which is pretty amazing. And, we try to brush it off in the bigger picture of what's going on, but the lives of everybody on that Rams team for the last 10 days has been thrown inside out. I mean, I guarantee you a lot of those players and coaches and administrators and support staff and everything live in an area that's been, very seriously affected by the fires.
It's pretty hard not to.
Right. So it's not like you're focusing so you can go work at McDonald's and make sure you can flip burgers. I mean, this is a very difficult job which requires a lot of practice, repetition, attention to detail, focus, mentally as well as physically. And when you have, this, I'm not downplaying this, but for our purpose of the discussion, this inconvenience out there, this major, bigger than life situation that you're dealing with, to turn around and kick the shit out of a team when you have to play 700 miles away or however far Phoenix is. That's pretty impressive, and that is kudos to them for sure. You play all year for home field advantage, you get in the playoffs and stuff, and you lose your home field advantage. And again, don't give me I'm not being sensitive. I'm putting this in the perspective of this conversation.
Right.
But the fact that all of these things happen and they still do that is, Sean McVay might be one of the most underrated coaches, even though
it's true.
Everybody loves to kiss his ass. He still might be unappreciated for what the genius that he is.
Yeah, other than that, I would say that there was no real surprises this weekend. I am excited for next weekend, and next week we will go over all of that on here. What's up?
One last thing, because it's kind of like Giant adjacent. Has your opinion at all changed about Sam Darnold after one playoff game?
No.
Okay, good.
No.
I'm glad you said that, because again, another hot topic tonight was, you still want Sam Darnold? I'm like, yes. First of all, I don't think his market value dropped because of one playoff game. So I don't think he's even we're not going to be swimming in the Sam Darnold pool anyway, but I'll take what you did over 14-3 as opposed to what you did in one playoff game under, tough situation. So I'm with you. Nothing changes for me for opinion for him. I don't think we're getting him. I don't think we'll be able to get him. And I don't think anything less of him after this one game.
His only big moment in his career.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't want to hear the narrative. He might be good enough to get you somewhere, but what can't take you over the hump. One game in the playoffs after today. One.
So we'll go over all that stuff next week. If there's any Giants news, we'll go over that next week as well. And if there's not, we're going to start talking about how to fix this Giants roster. That's coming up one way or another. So if we've got news that's going to take precedence, the Giants fire someone, the Giants hire someone, Mike Kafka goes somewhere, that'll probably be a bigger discussion. But if there is no Giants news, then we will just talk Giants players and roster.
Well, also, we want to do a little tease. We don't want to give away what we're doing tomorrow, but if you...
Oh, no, you can talk about it. It's not a secret.
Oh, it's not a secret anymore? All right. Friend of the show...
It'll be tonight.
Tonight. Mr. Nicky Snacks was a participant, a contestant on your favorite game show, Wheel of Fortune, which will be airing tonight, 7:30 Eastern Time, in the New York area and on the East Coast. And we will be jumping aboard a very special live broadcast on the Talking Giants YouTube feed as we break down Mystery Science Theater 3000 style, analyzing his performance on there. So check it out. It should be a lot of fun. Like all your favorites from our show and from Talking Giants will be on it. The two of us will be on it. So it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. So be sure to tune into Talking Giants tonight for that. Next week for us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and of course YouTube. Until next time, go Giants.
Go Giants.